So welcome, everybody. Glad you were able to come tonight. I'm Dr. Steve Tuchscherer, and I'll be your host. I want to share a bit of my background. I've worked in the healthcare field now for over 40 years. My specialty has been helping people with chronic conditions using what we call comprehensive whole-person care. As I look at you, Mary Kay, I see not just a nose and a smiling mouth, but I see a head, arms, legs, and a torso. So you're more than just one part. In today's conventional healthcare approach, unfortunately, it's very segmented. If you've got a problem with one organ, you go to a specialist who specializes in that organ. And that's good for going deep with information, but what's often lost is perspective. We actually function and work as one whole person. And especially with chronic conditions, in order to understand what's causing it, we have to look at the whole person. And so that's what I've done for the last 40 years. I have a master's in nutrition, 1985 from the University of Bridgeport. So for many years, I helped people with looking at their diet, balancing their body chemistry. With the degree in chiropractic from 1998, I began to understand more about how the brain and the nervous system control the rest of the body. And relative to autoimmune disorders, that's critically important because we will talk about how autoimmune processes and what causes them has a direct impact on your brain. But it works the other way too. Your brain can actually create inflammation in your body and set the stage for autoimmunity. Through the last several years, we've helped quite a few people in our practice suffering with autoimmune disorders. And you can read about their successes on this testimonial sheet. So here's my greatest fear. A person comes into our office with a complaint, and they go through our process, which can be quite rigorous and intensive. To correct a chronic condition, it's often necessary to change your whole lifestyle. What you're eating, exercise, taking nutritional supplements, avoiding certain foods, changing the way you think. So it's not a small commitment. So people go through our program, and they experience life-changing improvements in their health, as you read here. And then once they finish their program, sometimes they leave our office and we don't see them again. And sometimes I wake up at night thinking, where is such and such a person? How are they doing? Are they continuing with the lifestyle changes we told them about and talked to them about? Because with autoimmunity, folks, if you don't do that, it's going to come back with a vengeance. So that's what we'll be talking about tonight. Why autoimmunity is such an insidious health challenge, and why it's so critically important that whatever you do in order to get healthier, recover from your symptoms, you keep that as a lifestyle for the rest of your life. And one reason I'm so interested in autoimmune disorders is because I actually have one myself. In autoimmune disorders, essentially what's happening is your immune system, which is supposed to protect you, is actually attacking you and killing you. We'll talk about why that happens and some of the specific steps that happen in that process. So the immune system goes bonkers and starts attacking healthy tissue. When I started learning about autoimmunity, of course, I did all the testing on myself that I was going to be asking my patients to do. And by the way, everything I talk about and describe in terms of action steps, I personally do in my own life, and I'll do it the rest of my life. If I don't, I'm the biggest fool on the planet because I know what the consequences are of not doing it. So I ran the tests on myself, and what I found was I had antibodies, which are kind of immune cell that tag other cells for destruction by the immune system. I had antibodies to gluten, which is the protein in wheat. I also had antibodies to what's called tissue transglutaminase. So that's an enzyme that helps certain cells in the intestine function. And I had antibodies to those cells. So when that happens, what happens is the cell that you have the antibody to gets destroyed by your immune cells. And I also had antibodies to an enzyme. Glutamic acid decarboxylase is the name of it. And what this enzyme does, it converts a molecule named glutamate to GABA. So this is how we notate the activity of enzymes. So this is the pathway, glutamate goes to GABA. The enzyme GAD facilitates that conversion. GABA is very important in your body because it's the only brain chemical that calms your brain. So if you lack GABA, you get nervous, anxious, emotional, small things upset you, and that's part of my personal health history. I had that tendency. Also, this enzyme helps the pancreas make insulin. So if you've got antibodies that are attacking that enzyme, your pancreas has difficulty making insulin, which mine does, and you have difficulty converting glutamate to GABA for your brain. So not only are you more prone to have diabetic problems, but you have this nervous, anxious, emotional pattern. So that's me. So when I learned that, it kind of put pieces together, and it caused me to look even further into what causes autoimmunity, why do I have it. I think I have it because of exposure to Agent Orange when I was in Vietnam. So it's like this is a club. You know, we're in this together. And what I'm sharing with you is what I'm going to do the rest of my life because I want to stay functional the rest of my life. And that's another important take-home message. If you have autoimmune patterns, it means that certain genes for autoimmune expression have been flipped on like a light switch. So let's say that I go over here and break that light switch that operates that light. What that means is that light is going to be on forever. Now, we can do things to dampen the expression of that light, like put a blanket over it, but the light is still on. So that's a good analogy for how autoimmunity works. Once autoimmune genes are activated, they'll be on the rest of your life. You can't turn them off, but there's a ton of things you can do and must do in order to mitigate their expression. So your life can be unaffected by the fact that you have an autoimmune pattern if you do the right things and do them consistently. So that's what we'll cover tonight. Okay, so in this packet is a summary of educational requirements for doctors of chiropractic compared to doctors of medicine. Because I have a background in nutrition, it's probably understandable that I'm talking about autoimmune disorders. But beyond that, I want to point out some key differences in medical education and chiropractic education. Chiropractic falls into the category of alternative or holistic care. What that means is when we're looking at a person's history and trying to solve a problem relating to their complaints, we don't look, as I was saying earlier, just at the area of symptom. We have to look at the body as a whole. And so that's why we study so much anatomy, 456 hours, compared to 250 hours in medical training. Physiology is how your body functions in a state of health. Alternative care is all about understanding what makes a body healthy, and then looking at the patient in front of me and seeing how this patient compares to the healthy model. Medicine is defined as the diagnosis and treatment of disease through medication and surgery. Pathology is disease, so that's why medical doctors study so much pathology. Diagnosis, 408 hours in chiropractic training, 113 in medical school. Diagnosis is all about putting the pieces together. So you've got a symptom in your sinus. Where's that coming from? It's probably not coming from your sinus. Could be coming from your stomach, could be coming from your lung, could be coming from your intestinal tract. And so in diagnosis, we have to, again, see the body as a whole, understand what affects other areas of the body, so we can run down the actual cause of your specific symptom. Let's go to the next page. Tissues affected by autoimmunity. Autoimmunity is the third leading cause of illness and death in the world. So it's really a serious, significant problem. Most cases of autoimmune activity aren't even diagnosed. So you'll recognize under tissues names of conditions that people are familiar with. The most common autoimmune disorder, at least in our country, is thyroid autoimmunity, Hashimoto's, which is an underactive thyroid due to immune activity, and also Graves', which is an overactive thyroid. Autoimmune activity can affect the brain, joints, muscles, blood, skin, lungs, nerves, GI tract. When you have an autoimmune disorder, the problem isn't so much with the tissue that's being affected. The problem is with your immune system. And so we can't get too focused on what tissue is being affected, like your thyroid, or your colon if it's colitis, or your joints if it's rheumatoid arthritis. While we attend to that area, we really have to take a step back and look at what's going on with the immune system and why is your immune system attacking that tissue that it's supposed to protect. The last one, this is a very important page because we'll be talking about why the immune system gets amped up to the point where it attacks healthy tissue. And the reason is autoimmune triggers, and that's summarized on this page. Now, we're going to be going through this in detail, but this is a page that I want you to keep someplace where it's visible, like on your refrigerator door or on your mirror. These are the critical aspects of your lifestyle that will determine if you're going to have an experience of health for the rest of your life, or if at some point you're going to succumb to the autoimmune expression that is already active in your body. And so you can never really go by symptoms. Well, I'm feeling good. I don't have those aches and pains I used to. I have more energy. My brain fog is lifted. So I'm going to eat that gluten, or I'm going to eat that dairy, or I'm going to whatever the lifestyle characteristic is that got you into the problem in the first place. You can't do that. Symptoms are the last part of the deterioration process that occurs. By the time you have the symptom, there's already tissue destruction. So we'll talk about the different phases of autoimmune activity. So you can't base your life decisions on how your symptoms are or aren't doing. That's really playing with fire. So you've got to, again, understand the process and then make your decisions based on that understanding. You have to be an informed healthcare advocate for yourself. So in this group, there's just a couple people that aren't recent or current patients. And I put this workshop together primarily for people who have already been in our practice. But for those that haven't, at the end of the workshop, if what I say makes sense and you want my help in unraveling your health issues, there will be a chance to do that through what we call an offer, and I'll go into that in more detail. Let's look at autoimmunity. The big picture. Your immune system is attacking your body. The only difference, which gives rise to the different names, is which tissue is attacked. But the mechanism is the same. Key understanding. If you're autoimmune against one tissue, you're probably autoimmune against others, as I mentioned my own experience. There's a way to identify where the autoimmune activity is going on in your body. There's specialized lab tests that have been created. Cyrex Labs. Aristo Vojdani, he's really a worldwide leading authority in immunology. He developed that lab. Now, there's a big difference between autoimmune reaction and autoimmune disease. So autoimmune reaction is when you've got antibodies that are tagging healthy tissue and immune cells are actually damaging that tissue. But it's not yet to the point where, with a medical imaging study, you could identify tissue damage. That's autoimmune reaction. If it progresses and it's not checked, that's where it becomes autoimmune disease, when lab markers and imaging studies show actual tissue damage. So wouldn't it be better, folks, if you have autoimmune activity in your body, to know early as possible before there's a lot of tissue damage? That's what our concern is, to identify when it's in the reaction stage, not when it's torn your body apart. Again, there's no cure, but there are many natural protocols to greatly improve your life and preserve your body. So 1 in 9 women are autoimmune and 1 in 12 men, and this is diagnosed cases. When you compare that to cancer, 9 million people diagnosed with cancer and 22 million with heart disease in our country. 50 million have been diagnosed with autoimmune disease. And again, there's many more who are undiagnosed. So it's really a rampant problem. It increases every year. Most cases are not diagnosed. Most cases, therefore, continue to progress. Conventional healthcare has very little to offer besides steroids. With autoimmunity, again, your immune system is going bonkers. It's attacking and destroying healthy tissue. The medical solution is, well, if the immune system is the problem because it's destroying healthy tissue, I know what we'll do. We'll kill the immune system. That's what steroids are used for, to squash your immune system. And if you've ever taken steroids, you know that the warning on the packet that comes in the product is may cause chronic infections and a whole long list of other problems. Conventional alternative healthcare providers may not fully understand autoimmunity. It all leads to tissue destruction. So when we look at various health challenges in a prioritized fashion, autoimmunity is at the very, very top of the list. And by this I mean, when I'm unraveling a complex health history, there are certain key health breakers that I look for. Because I know that if we don't address those health breakers and they're present, anything else we do is not going to be effective. And guess what the number one health breaker is? It is autoimmunity. So if that's present and it's not addressed, nothing else is going to be very effective. Other health breakers, number 2, blood sugar has to be stabilized. Anemia has to be identified and corrected. Adrenal gland function has to be addressed. Gut, GI function. Also, inflammation, and a key player, key cause of inflammation in the body is imbalance in essential fatty acids. So these are the key patterns that I look for, and again, number 1 is autoimmunity. It's no coincidence that any or all of these can be triggers for the autoimmune response. As I've said, in autoimmune conditions, our immune system is mistakenly attacking healthy tissue. It's making autoantibodies to the tissue it's attacking. The other white blood cells, like the natural killer cells, go after the self-tissue that's been tagged by the antibodies and starts destroying it. So besides lab tests, there's certain common indicators from the patient's history that tells me that there's likely an autoimmune pattern present. Okay, from the history, symptoms fluctuate. They get worse, they get better. They get worse, they get better. They fluctuate in intensity, but also they tend to migrate throughout the whole body. Because understand that with autoimmunity, it's actually a problem not with that gland or organ or tissue. It's the immune system, which is present throughout your whole body. People with autoimmune problems have been to countless healthcare providers, and they're still struggling. When they come into the office, they've got a file that big. All kinds of tests, medical reports, supplements they've been taking, medications they've been taking, and they're still struggling. They also, if they have any kind of alternative inkling at all, bring in bags of supplements. The scary thing and the sad thing is a lot or most of what they're taking is actually making them worse. Here's a key one for women. Symptoms began after pregnancy. One of the triggers for autoimmunity is hormonal swings, and of course that's prevalent during pregnancy. And it's not uncommon for women to experience their first symptoms of an autoimmune process shortly after the birth of their first child. So let's delve into the immune system a bit. It's a very complex system, so we're just going to touch on the highlights as it relates to autoimmune function. So we're going to arbitrarily divide the immune system into 2 broad categories. The first category are the natural barriers, and these include your skin, lungs, eyes, intestinal lining, and the blood-brain barrier. The second part is the immune cells. And the purpose of the barriers, by the way, is to keep bad stuff that should be outside the body from getting inside the body. But once bad stuff gets into the body, there's the white blood cells that then take over. And we divide those into different categories. Th1 and Th2, 2 different kinds of white blood cells. Now, the Th1 cells, I've mentioned these already, are the cells that go after the bad guys, natural killer cells, T lymphocytes, and others. They're the front line of defense against any foreign invader. Antigen is like a germ. The Th2 cells, called the B cells, these are the immune cells that make the antibodies that tag the invader so that these cells, which are killers, can go after the invader and kill it. In addition to the Th1 and Th2, there are cells that keep an eye on the Th1 and Th2 cells to make sure that they're doing their job in the right proportion at the right time. And those are called Th3 regulatory cells. So they balance communication between Th1 and Th2. Th17 cells, now these are cells that allow communication between Th1, Th2, and Th3. But if certain disruptions occur between Th1, Th2, and Th3, these cells go bonkers and they cause massive tissue destruction. So here's a picture that portrays the loss of balance between Th1 and Th2. And this is actually key in the onset of autoimmune activity. So here's a representation of what it might look like if the Th2 cells, these are the B cells that produce antibodies, are too active. Okay, so again, the B cells, they make antibodies that tag what the killer cells are supposed to attack. So what if the B cells go crazy and they produce mass amounts of antibodies, and the antibodies are now tagging everything in sight for attack by the natural killer cells? What that means is there's going to be massive activity from the natural killer cells against all those tissues that have been inappropriately tagged by the antibodies. So that's if Th2 is overactive. Now, if Th1, if that system is overactive, remember those are the natural killer cells, the T lymphocytes. Those are like the pit bulls that go after bad guys and tear them up. What if those are overly produced? Now you've got the bulldogs going after every healthy tissue in the body, not just the bad guys. So it's critical that Th1 and Th2 operate in balance. The cytokines, I mentioned those. These are the cells that carry information between Th1 and Th2, and very importantly, between Th3, the regulators. The Th3, that's like the police captains that are back at headquarters, and they're in touch with the sergeants, the Th2, and the line police, the Th1. And they're making sure that they're all doing what they're supposed to do. And the cytokines ensure that the communication between those two groups is proper. But the more out of balance Th1 and Th2 become, the more tissue destruction occurs, and the increased production of this bad guy, interleukin-17, it's one of those messengers, causing extreme levels of tissue destruction. So anything we can do to keep Th1 and Th2 balanced and Th17 from increasing is very favorable for your health and for the balance of the immune system. Now, another part to this is this interleukin-17 can turn on a very, very destructible pathway called the cytokine-inducible nitric oxide system, leading to extreme tissue destruction. So this is a scary situation. Here you've got immune cells that are supposed to protect you, that are going bonkers, creating inflammation, damaging healthy tissue. Most of the time, you don't know which tissue they're damaging. So it's very, very important to understand why this happens in the first place, because why it happens all relates to lifestyle, which we can totally control. There's two reasons why this might happen. Dysregulation refers to loss of optimal function of different organs or systems in the body. Inflammation, blood sugar, adrenals, hormones, imbalances in the brain function, neurological imbalances. Pregnancy, I mentioned, and low vitamin D. Vitamin D is a very important regulator of those T3 regulatory cells. Active antigen, again, antigen is just a fancy name for germ. Chronic infections, bacterial, viral, mold, any place in the body, very commonly in the gut. Infections in the gut. Eating foods that you're sensitive to. So in my situation, I got tested and I have antibodies to gluten, which is the protein in wheat. If I were to eat a meal with a lot of wheat, antibodies are already present in my body. They would see that wheat and they would tag the wheat for attack by the natural killer cells. Unfortunately, though, when natural killer cells attack a molecule, they often don't just attack that molecule. They attack other molecules that look kind of like it. What molecules look kind of like gluten? Well, parts of your brain. So if you are gluten sensitive and you're eating gluten, you're inviting your immune cells, those killer cells, to attack and destroy your brain or the nerves in your legs or your thyroid. So that's called molecular mimicry. Okay. Environmental toxins, petrochemicals, metals. And right now, there have been 287 toxic, many carcinogenic chemicals found in the amniotic fluid of newborns. So our environment is just loaded with toxic chemicals. Any of these can enter the body, and through a process that we'll talk about in a minute, they get into the bloodstream, immune cells see them, they attack them. A lot of those are inanimate, so the immune system can't kill them. So instead, the immune system ends up damaging healthy tissue. And then leaky gut syndrome, that's a key player in the onset of autoimmune activity. So here's your small intestine, and then this is your bloodstream. So we eat food, chew it, goes into the intestine, where it's further broken down and then eventually absorbed into the bloodstream. And the way the molecules of food that have been broken down to very small pieces get into the bloodstream is through spaces between the cells called tight junctions. And there's a certain kind of protein that those junctions are made of. Zonulin and occludin make up those tight junctions. So me, being sensitive to gluten, if I eat a sandwich with a bunch of gluten, those molecules get into the small intestine, and there are immune cells in the intestine as well as in the blood. So what they will do is they'll see that as foreign because I'm sensitive to it, and they'll attack that gluten, and in the process could damage the lining of the intestine. So now those junctions that are supposed to be very small get bigger and bigger and bigger. So now I've got what's called a leaky gut. And so now not only does large molecules of gluten get into the bloodstream, but now I'm susceptible to viruses, parasites, chemicals, metals getting into the bloodstream. And when that happens, the immune cells that are swimming around in the bloodstream, just as they swim around in tissue, see that, and then they attack it to kill it. And in the process, create further damage to the intestine. And that's called inflammation, which now is free to travel throughout the body. The reason why leaky gut is such a central part to autoimmunity is because that's what allows stuff that shouldn't be getting into the bloodstream in large form to get into the bloodstream, where the immune cells see it and then go after it. That creates whole body inflammation. If you have a history of GI symptoms, currently have a lot of symptoms, constipation, diarrhea, gas, bloating, you eat a variety of foods and you get bloated, distended. Reflux, like GERD, is an aspect of that. This is likely going on, and again, that's almost like a prerequisite for the autoimmune process to begin. Here's a summary of what I was saying earlier about how the different parts of the immune system are triggered in an autoimmune process. If you've got poor regulation between Th1 and Th2, because the Th3 cells, the regulators, the captains that control the other police, if they're not doing their job because they don't have the wherewithal, the nutrients to do it, then that creates a greater imbalance in Th1 and Th2, and it also turns on interleukin 17, which in itself causes destruction, but that also leads to an activation of INOS, that's called the inducible nitric oxide system, which creates more severe tissue destruction. So when we talk about autoimmune activity destroying your body, this is really like the central piece to it. So if you can grasp that concept and hold it in your mind, then autoimmunity is not just a vague process in your body. There's actually steps to it, and there's reason those steps get turned on. Remember, 70–80% of your immune system is in your gut. So if you've got chronic GI symptoms, automatically know your immune system is a mess and prone to this type of reactivity. It's such an important concept that this diagram has been created to represent how inflammation in the gut at the very top, and that's usually, again, from an immune reaction to a food sensitivity or infection, leads to the production of inflammatory cells in the green. And as I was showing you, leaky gut, which makes you prone to more food sensitivities. Those inflammatory cells cross into the bloodstream. When they get up to the brain, they can actually go into the brain itself. They react with the cells in the brain, the immune cells called microglial cells, and that causes inflammation in the brain. Anytime there's a chronic history of GI disturbance, inflammation there, almost certainly there's going to be inflammation in the brain. Very similar to that process of leaky gut is what we refer to as a leaky blood-brain barrier. So this is the side view of the brain, and this is the membrane that protects the brain. And just like there's certain proteins that make up the tight junctions in the small intestine, those same proteins make up the structure of cells in the brain, zonulin and occludin. So there's lab tests that show if you have antibodies to zonulin and occludin, whether it's in the intestine or in the brain barrier. So let's say that the brain barrier has been breached. We'll talk about what causes that. Now what's going to happen is molecules that are floating by the brain in the bloodstream, that have no place in the brain start filtering into the brain. And these could be the same molecules that have passed inappropriately through your intestinal lining. Could be gluten, could be metals, viruses, parasites, fungi, metals, chemicals. So all that gets into the brain and it creates a fire in your brain. 9 out of 10 cells in your brain are not neurons. They're called microglial cells. They have numerous functions, do housekeeping tasks for the environment of the brain, cleaning out debris, but they also will react to anything that gets into the brain that shouldn't be there, and it creates massive inflammation. And once these get activated by a substance in the brain that shouldn't be there, you can't turn them off. So they'll be active like for their whole lifespan. In terms of the impact on brain tissue, as that says, fire in the gut, fire in the brain. So this is inflammation. Literally, it's a fire, whether it's in your intestine, your joints, your brain, or your nerves. It's a fire that literally destroys tissue. Leaky blood-brain barrier ensures that you're going to have some degree of inflammation in your brain. There are certain symptoms that are present when you've got inflammation in your brain. Brain fog, problems with short-term memory, depression, anxiety. This leaky brain barrier is one of the main causes. Now, thankfully, unfortunately, even though that's been damaged, the same steps that help repair the lining of the intestine will repair the lining of the brain. And so it's not like once that's damaged, it's going to be with you the rest of your life. The body can heal, and that is true for the brain barrier. Okay, so we talked about steroids, and what steroids do is they squash the immune system. And so the question we ask is there another option? And definitely there is. We have to identify what part of your immune system is hyperactive, Th1 or Th2. There's various ways to do that, different kinds of testing. So let's say if this is the Th1 system, the natural killer cells, T lymphocytes, and this is the B cells that produce antibodies, ideally they're in a state of balance. We want the B cells to make antibodies to stuff that shouldn't be in our body. We want the natural killer cells to go after those foreign invaders. But we want that to happen at the right time and in the right intensity. Let's say the Th1 system gets stuck in the on position, or the Th2 gets stuck in the on position. So if it's Th1 that's stuck in the on position, one thing we can do is we can boost up the function of Th2 and decrease the stimulation of Th1. And there's certain natural remedies that do both of those. And that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing, because that's why a lot of people with autoimmune problems, whether they know about it or don't, are taking substances that are actually making them worse, because they're amping up the part of their immune system that's already hyperactive. Then we have to support the Th3 regulatory system, and those are the captains back at headquarters that control the policemen. We have to suppress interleukin-17 and INOS. So let's talk about removing the triggers. Leaky gut syndrome, gut infections, unstable blood sugar, food sensitivities, inflammation, toxicity, bad adrenal glands, hormonal imbalances, low vitamin D, brain imbalances. The way we know if these triggers are going on for you, questionnaires help, history helps, lab tests help, and in-office testing called applied kinesiology is very useful as well. So we gather as much information as we can to sort through this, and then we address the areas that are contributing to your autoimmune process. When we're looking at blood work, we use not lab ranges, since they're so broad. We use what are called functional or optimal health ranges. Those are more narrow, based on people who are healthy. So we want our patients to be compared to people who are healthy, not people who are sick. So here's some examples of what I'm talking about in specific numbers. So let's look at glucose, blood sugar. The broad lab range that conventional healthcare providers use is 65 to 110. If your fasting blood sugar falls within that range, you'll be told everything's fine, even though every day you're having headaches, fatigue, cravings for sweets, you get irritable if you miss a meal. You've got all kinds of symptoms of low blood sugar, but if your blood sugar is within that broad range, you'll be told you're fine. So what we in alternative healthcare do is we look at more narrow ranges, because we want to find if your function is suffering because of lab value being outside of the healthy range. So the range we use is 85 to 100. TSH, the main marker for thyroid function, optimal range of 1.8 to 3, compared to the broad conventional range of 0.3 to 5.7. So based on your history, we may run any number of these tests: complete blood chemistry, salivary hormonal testing, stool ecology to see if there's proper gut flora, infections, parasite, food sensitivity testing to see if you're eating foods that are firing up your immune system, see if you have a leaky gut. Cyrex Labs also has a test to see if you've got a leaky brain barrier. And they also have a number of panels which, as a whole, will identify immune activity against 90 different tissues in your body. And so this is called a predictive antibody test, meaning if you've got antibodies tagging healthy tissue long before symptoms occur and long before massive tissue destruction has occurred, that process can be identified so that preventive steps can be taken. One of the problems with autoimmune activity is often people are taking nutrients, usually botanicals, that are triggering the wrong part of their immune system. Substances that stimulate Th1, echinacea, garlic, vitamin C, immune stimulants, licorice, astragalus, beta-glucan, maitake mushroom, lemon balm. So if you're taking those and you're already Th1 overactive or dominant, you're actually making yourself worse. You're feeding those natural killer cells to more aggressively attack and destroy more healthy tissue. Substances that stimulate Th2, caffeine, green tea, grapeseed extract, different herbal barks, lycopene, resveratrol, pycnogenol. So if your Th2 is ramped up and the B cells are already producing too many antibodies to tag too many tissues for attack by the natural killer cells, and you're taking any of those, you're actually telling the B cells to make more and more antibodies against more and more healthy tissue. So again, that's why people with autoimmune conditions bring in big grocery bags full of supplements, because of lack of information. So we want to take only the nutrients to support the part of your Th1 or Th2 system that is weak, and we want you to get off the stuff that's supporting the part of your immune system that's already hyperactive. We definitely want to support the regulatory cells. These maintain balance between Th1 and Th2. Vitamin D, critically important. We know vitamin D is very beneficial for musculoskeletal disorders, for mood, neurological tissue. More than anything else, it helps keep the immune system in balance. The broad lab ranges for vitamin D is 30 to 100. For someone with autoimmune history or activity, we want it to be closer to 80, because if you have an autoimmune history or problem, most of the time you won't be able to metabolize vitamin D very efficiently. So you need higher levels than the average person that doesn't have an autoimmune pattern. Fish oils, EPA and DHA, are very important. They also help moderate the activity of the immune system. 3,000 milligrams would be an optimal range. And then we'll talk about nitric balance. It's another way of regulating immune function. So if you're only going to take a few nutrients to stabilize your immune system, it would have to include glutathione. The form that we use, it's a cream that you apply to your skin, and it goes through the skin into the bloodstream. It's a compound that acts as an immune regulator, so it helps keep Th1 and Th2 in balance. It's an antioxidant, and it helps the liver detoxify. It's the main protective antioxidant for our cells' mitochondria. That's where energy is made in the cells. Oxidation is a process that happens in our body. It's a natural process. We need it, but when it's at work, it creates destructive byproducts. So as an example, let's say one of those white blood cells swimming around in the bloodstream spots a foreign invader. It's going to kill it, and the way it kills it is squirts a very toxic substance onto the foreign invader. It's called superoxide. And the superoxide, like, lyses or destroys the body of, let's say, the parasite. Understandably, if it can destroy the body of a parasite, it can also destroy healthy tissue. This is called oxidation, by the way. And so an antioxidant, it allows this process to happen, but as soon as it happens, it converts the byproduct of that activity to a harmless molecule. And glutathione is what allows that process to occur. So if you're taking glutathione orally, there's a chance that you're not absorbing very much of it. That's one of the problems with glutathione. So that's why we use the topical. So here's a picture illustrating glutathione's role. So let's say a virus gets into your bloodstream. Immune system is triggered. Oxidative stress occurs, so the white blood cell squirts that superoxide onto the invader, creates oxidative stress. Now that very process depletes glutathione levels. As glutathione depletes, another system that's very detrimental is activated. It's called the INOS system that leads to tissue destruction and the inappropriate activation of some of those killing white blood cells. As long as glutathione levels are optimal, these lower phases don't happen. So up here in the left-hand corner, GSH, that stands for glutathione. Notice the arrow going up. So when glutathione is used, it becomes what's called oxidized glutathione, that's GSSH. But then if we have proper nutrients and enzymes in our body, that oxidized glutathione gets converted back to the form of glutathione that protects us. So there's certain nutrients that allow that conversion to happen. And we call that glutathione recycler. It's actually a formula put together by Dr. Karazian, who wrote these two books. A lot of what I'm sharing is from these two books. So he formulated these products. This is what glutathione recycler contains. Everything I tell patients to do, I take, so I use these every day myself. An environmental stressor activates the immune system only after glutathione levels are depleted. So that's how critically important glutathione is. For everybody, but especially for you guys, including me, we have this tendency for immune activation against healthy tissue. Anything we can do to squelch that, we have to do, and this is one of the most important things. Okay, nitric oxide is important in regulating the immune system. So it's a molecule, written NO. It's a messenger molecule involved in many physiological and pathological processes, pathological being bad. It plays both destructive and protective roles in autoimmunity, depending on which form or isomer is expressed. These all fall into the category of nitric oxide synthase forms. So the two on the top are the good ones. NOS is neuronal nitric oxide, optimizes neuronal synapse activity. That's where the nerve endings come together. It protects nerve tissue. Another good one, ENOS, endothelial nitric oxide, helps tissue recover and regenerate, balances, enhances blood flow, dissolves plaque in the lining of blood vessels, and it dilates blood vessels. So I may recommend this for someone who's got circulatory issues, blood pressure problems. One of these three, though, is bad, and that's the INOS. That promotes tissue destruction, promotes inflammation, promotes autoimmune attack. And so one concern we should all have is that a lot of people take what's called arginine, it's an amino acid. They take it in order to increase nitric oxide because, let's say, they've got concerns about circulation. But arginine causes an increase of the two good, but also of the bad one. So especially with autoimmune patterns, you don't want to take arginine. We want to take a product that increases the two good ones, but not the bad ones. We want to dampen the bad one. The product I use, again formulated by Dr. Karazian, is called Nitric Balance. So we need a healthy balance of this nitric oxide system to support tissue healing, dampen inflammation and destruction of tissue, and modulate autoimmune activity. And this is what it contains, different natural substances. All right, so here's a summary of the critical role of these nutrients, glutathione and nitric oxide, in the form of nitric balance. Enhancing repair of the intestinal mucosa, dampens the initial cytokine-triggered inflammation, helps modulate Th1 and Th2, supports Th3 activity, which in turn regulates Th1 and Th2. It dampens Th17, that's what leads to tissue destruction, and it supports tissue recovery. So key nutrients. It's a summary of the leaky gut cycle, loss of tight intestinal junction integrity, entry of antigens, again that's fancy name for germ, and peptides, large protein molecules, leading to multiple food sensitivities. So once your gut is leaky, you're susceptible to increasing numbers of sensitivities. Intestinal inflammation, again that's a key player, even the central player in autoimmunity. And there's various ways to affect a healing of the gut. We use numerous products. One of them is called Repairvite. Some of you are familiar with that. Dietary approaches are very important in healing the gut, and generically speaking, the approach is to use what's called a paleo diet. So that's primarily high-quality light proteins and vegetables. So it eliminates from the diet the most common allergens, gluten, soy, dairy, none of which I eat. It eliminates synthetic foods, chemicalized foods, artificial stimulants, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, autoimmunity is a metabolic problem involving multiple body systems. So we're going to talk about the brain now. Anytime you have a metabolic imbalance, meaning organs aren't working properly and body chemistry is out of whack, your brain is going to be affected because your brain requires 30% of the energy produced through metabolism. And your brain is a common site for autoimmune attack. It's called neurological autoimmunity. A loss of optimal function of your brain can actually be a triggering reason for autoimmune activity. So this is your brain from the side. This little bump back here is called the cerebellum that controls balance, posturing, coordination. This thickening here is the brainstem that controls organ function, and this is the spinal cord. So you've got your frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe. Among the many important functions in the frontal lobe, one of its most important is it regulates the proper expression of the brainstem, which then, through cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, operates the viscera or the organs, like your heart, like your stomach, like your intestines. Okay, so these plus signs from the frontal lobe to the brainstem and from the brainstem to the viscera means proper regulation. Now let's say that you've got an autoimmune disorder and it's actually being caused by a decreased function of your frontal lobe. And that can be secondary to any kinds of stress, but stress in a sense is what suppresses frontal lobe function. So now your frontal lobe is fatigued, and instead of proper regulation of the brainstem, you have no regulation of the brainstem. And now the vagus nerve has no ability to regulate the function of the internal organs. So all of this creates specific symptom patterns that I'm going to share with you next. Because of chronic stress, and the stress, by the way, could be metabolic, meaning coming from your body chemistry, coming from autoimmune activity, coming from autoimmune attacks on your brain tissue, coming from a leaky brain barrier, inflammation in your brain. So all of that can cause a loss of frontal lobe function. Look at those symptoms. Those are all signs of a loss of function, not just of the frontal lobe, but of the upper brain. Depression and anxiety, difficulty scanning pages, difficulty adding or subtracting, difficulty with neutral expression, decreased memory, learning difficulties, lack of focus, altered sensation or numbness, changes in handwriting, anger, increased irritability, impulsivity, chronic pain, lack of motivation, dyslexia, ADD, ADHD. So when that is present, then what follows next is loss of function of the brainstem, and these are the symptoms. Again, brainstem controls internal organs. Chronic pain and fatigue, irritable bowel, urinary tract infections, fibromyalgia, migraine, poor posture, insomnia, dizziness, vertigo, heart palpitations, high blood pressure, cold hands and feet, sensitivity to light and sound. At this point, pretty apparent that the brain is critical to the function of your viscera, and so we can't just look at your organ function, your body chemistry, we have to look at your brain function because those are so intimately entwined. So we have to do some assessment of brain function because maybe imbalance in your brain is the trigger for the autoimmune activity. Maybe the autoimmune activity is a trigger for inflammation in your brain. Maybe it's going both ways. So we have to assess brain function using neurological tests, identify what part of the brain is most compromised, and then support your brain. The brain needs fuel, so we have to make sure your body chemistry is optimal. We've got to get your organs working better. The brain also needs exercise, so we have to begin working the parts of your brain that are most compromised. We do that through a variety of rehab exercises, balance exercises, stimulation with sound, with light, with smell. The metronome is a device that allows us to have you perform motions in keeping with the sound of the metronome. Frontal lobe is involved in timing and prediction. Spin therapy, that's where you're looking at a target as you're turning in one direction. Warm calorics, that's squirting warm water into your ear to stimulate your cerebellum. Stimulating your joints on the weak cerebellum side, vibration. So there's an endless list of rehab exercises we can use both in the office as well as at home to get your brain firing better. Why is what we do different from every other doctor that you have seen? One of the biggest concepts to understand is that, again, to help someone with a chronic condition, we've got to look at everything, the whole ball of wax, because everything affects everything else. We can't focus on one tissue and just look at that. So we do that. It's called comprehensive care. We leave no stone unturned to identify the triggers leading to your autoimmune condition. No stone is unturned. For those who are not currently under care or have not been, I'm going to describe what we call the offer. If you'd like my assistance in unraveling your chronic health condition, this is what you'd have to do. It's what we call a 2-visit case review and consultation. On visit 1, we do a complete neurological evaluation. Whatever labs you have from the last year, you bring those in, we'll evaluate those. We have questionnaires that you'll fill out, and that'll give me an understanding of your history. And for that first visit, it helps to have your significant other attend, because there's a volume of information that has to be processed, and 2 heads are better than 1. Then on visit 2, I let you know if you're a good candidate for benefit from what we do. And if you are, I tell you what further testing needs to be done, review the neurological findings from the first visit. I lay out a detailed treatment plan, exactly what we'll do, how long it takes per visit, how many visits you need and over what period of time, the cost, and it's very important for the spouse or significant other to attend that visit. We help people with a wide range of health problems. Autoimmunity is just one. And so we limit the number of people that we're helping for each condition to, in this case, 5 per month. Normally, those 2 visits is $189, but if you sign up after we're done with the lecture, we decrease that to $77. And if you sign up and also pay tonight, we further decrease the fee to $49. Not everybody qualifies for this kind of care because not everybody is motivated enough. In order to go through a program like this, you have to be highly motivated. You have to be willing to make serious lifestyle changes, be responsible for your health, and understand that insurance may cover some of the care but not all, so you're going to have to pay something out of pocket. We work with healthcare financing, so if you have no insurance coverage, you can finance the cost of care for as little as $200 to $300 a month using healthcare financing. So ponder this question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how serious is your illness? How has it affected your relationships, your work, your ability to enjoy your life? And where are you on a scale of 1 to 10 about being serious about getting a handle on your health challenge? So that's the offer for those of you who are not under care or have not been under care. Now, for those of you who have been under care but haven't been here for a while, there's another kind of offer, no cost consultation, where you come in and we talk about where things are now and what's happened between now and your last visit. Everyone who has previously been in or is currently a patient, there's a special bonus. It's a test that you're going to do on your own to see if you have a leaky brain barrier. Again, side view of the brain, the blood-brain barrier, and the barrier, just like the intestine, should allow small molecules to gain entry into the brain. Small molecules that are used to make bigger molecules like GABA, which is one of the brain chemicals. And those molecules, of course, pass by the brain in the blood, and then they enter the brain through the brain barrier. GABA is the only brain chemical that calms the brain. If you take GABA and it calms you down, that's not good. That's bad news, because it means that this large molecule, which should not be getting into the brain from the blood, is actually able to pass through the brain barrier into the brain because the brain barrier has been damaged. And now those openings are very wide. So not only will your brain barrier allow GABA to get into the brain, it'll allow chemicals, gluten, viruses, parasites even, weird stuff that shouldn't be there. And when that happens, the microglial cells go on a rampage and it creates inflammation. And I'm going to give you this tonight. You take 2 500 milligram capsules of GABA in the morning on an empty stomach, and then you take note of any change in your state over the next several hours. If you get sleepy or energized, if you get moody or happy, if you get calm or agitated, any change like that means that GABA has gotten into your brain, and it shouldn't be able to. The only way it can get into your brain is if those gaps are really big. If that happens, and you've got a leaky brain barrier, all is not lost because there are things you can do in order to heal that membrane. So when you come for that complimentary 20-minute check-in, bring the results of the GABA challenge. Bob at the front has a new set of those questionnaires that we've had you fill out in the past, and that gives me another way of measuring where things are at right now with you in your current state of health. Take that sheet that summarizes the triggers for autoimmune activity, put it in a prominent place, and monitor your lifestyle, your life changes, because this is a pattern that is always going to be with you, but doesn't have to control your life if you are vigilant and conscientious and monitor your lifestyle choices consistently. So the good news is you've got information. The bad news is it's useless unless you apply it. But I'm sure you will apply it. So thank you very much. Okay.